If you'd like to support this podcast, please check out our Support Us page at asymmetricalhaircuts.com.
Yes, do buy us a coffee on Patreon. That way you also get to hear our special War Criminals Book Club recordings with our fellow international justice reporter, Molly Quell.
He steadfastly insisted that he was guilty, quote, only of aiding and abetting in the commission of the crimes with which he was charged, that he himself had never committed an overt act. And I think I could have written that sentence basically for every single defense of a suspect I have ever covered in any trial in any court for war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity.
It's often a bit of a riot.
And sometimes it's a serious discussion about books, and sometimes not, and sometimes films. And we'll pick things that portray the worlds of international courts and war crimes.
And it's only on Patreon.
Come find us there.
So we see some small steps, but it's really not enough because the urgency is so humongous for Bonaire. It cannot be underestimated. So we need much bigger steps and much faster, and this taken much more seriously.
Medieval crimes are being committed.
I come with clean hands.
Victims of horrific crimes want justice.
We don't have anything better than this.
This is Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
All rise.
Hi, Janet.
Hey, Steph. Well, today we wanted to pick back up on our series on environmental crimes.
Yeah, as our listeners will remember, last year we did a multi-part series on where international justice for climate crimes was moving. We called it the Echo File series, and we looked at climate cases at the ECHR and the European courts, Ecocide at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the Vanuatu advisory opinion at the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, and ITLOS. And you can listen back to those justice updates. You can find them on our website.
Yeah, and great. Today we thought that we'd look into another bit of this puzzle, and this time we're looking at the national level. I think we need a bit of Stephopedia here.
Well, I'm very thankful that this is a script that was written out for me because I haven't paid that close attention. So I'm actually very interested in having this conversation today. But the background...
Oh, Steph.
The background was that in 2015, in an unprecedented move by the Dutch environmental nonprofit group Urgenda, they sued the Netherlands, the Dutch government, for not doing enough to protect its citizens from climate change. And in 2019, the government lost that case.
Okay, I am just going to object right now to the idea that we're going to call it Urgenda and we're going to call it Urgenda, are we not? Are we not Dutch, everybody?
Yes, Urgenda.
Okay, right. Everybody get behind the Dutch pronunciation of everything. But since then, I think we've seen a snowball of cases brought by civil society against their governments for their lack of action on climate. There have also been some cases against private companies, but we're going to do that another day.
Yeah, according to the Grantham Research Institute / Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, there have been over 2,340 cases filed in court since 1984, and more than 2/3 of the cases that have been filed have been since 2015, which was also the year of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, let's head back to the Urgenda decision later in the pod. I'm sure it will come up, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the most recent decisions as well. Today, this is the most recent case, one that's unfolding here in the Netherlands. Well, they're in the Netherlands because I'm actually recording from Lithuania, but I'm with you in spirit. On January the 11th this year, 8 residents of the island of Bonaire, which is in the Caribbean, filed a case.
And Bonaire is in the Caribbean, but it's also part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And we'll link a bit to a YouTube video explaining exactly how that convoluted relationship works.
They did that filing together with Greenpeace Netherlands. It's a lawsuit against the Dutch state. And to discuss it, we have one of the plaintiffs in the case, activist Kjelld Masoud Kroon. Hi, Kjelld.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
And we have Eefje de Kroon. Eefje is the climate expert at Greenpeace Netherlands, and she's also working in the case. So we have 2 Kroons on the case, which is always good. Kroon means crown in the Netherlands. It's a crown case, you can say. Hi, Eefje.
Hi, good morning. And thanks for the perfect pronunciation of my name. Doesn't happen very often.
We are nothing if not Dutch. So we're going to give that little bit of context first. Bonaire has just over 20,000 people living in it. It was long a Dutch colony and since 2010 has been a special municipality of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
The plaintiff claimed that the Netherlands are violating their human rights by not taking sufficient measures to protect the population of this low-lying island from the effects of the climate crisis. The change is being handled by a very familiar court to me, the District Court of The Hague, where I spent a lot of my time following these kinds of cases.
So we know that the case didn't actually start in January, but you already sent a letter previously to the Dutch government in May 2023. Eefje, let's kick off with you. What was the government's response to that letter and where are we now?
Yeah, so it's difficult to tell you what the response was from the government without actually going into why we launched the case. But very briefly, basically the government said, oh dear, we did not really realize the gravity of what was happening in this part of the Netherlands. Let's see what we can do. Here you have a bit of money. Let's come up with a climate plan now in terms of adaptation for Bonaire. But in terms of actually stopping the climate crisis, the government is saying we're already doing a lot. We're working internationally. Look at all of these great things. And that's basically it. So some steps have been taken. We see some progress, we see some movement, but that's also in comparison to nothing happening really in the past decades/centuries. So there's a very big backlog that needs fixing. So we see some small steps, but it's really not enough because the urgency is so humongous for Bonaire. It cannot be underestimated. So we need much bigger steps and much faster, and this taken much more seriously.
So before we go back to the intricacies of the case, Eefje is talking about how urgent it is now. So Kjelld, can you explain a bit to us how Bonaire is suffering from the effects of climate change? And you know the island and you've seen it over the years. What do you notice now when you walk around? What are the real effects?
There's a couple of things that are really affecting people directly now. I must say, as like a caveat, I only go on Bonaire like periodically now since I live in Amsterdam. I must in that also say that I'm in a privilege that I don't have to live with all these consequences right now. But one thing that affects people the most that I'm hearing is the extreme heat. A lot of people that cannot go outside, definitely elderly people and such, or people that are sick already that cannot go outside in the middle of the day anymore because it's just so hot that they cannot stand it. We're having more issues with water damage on the island, parts of the city that are close to harbors and things like that are flooding, depending if it's like higher tide or if it's a bit of a stronger rainfall, that those parts are just becoming completely submerged. I know that our co-plaintiff, Oni, he's a farmer himself as well. His seeds are not growing well anymore because they're not getting the amount of water and stuff that they need for them to get out of the ground. So there's like a couple of different factors that are affecting our people right now.
So, Eefje, if we look at how you decided to bring this court case, what struck me as soon as I heard about it was the idea that Bonaire is essentially just a municipality in the Netherlands. I don't know, are you kind of saying this is equal treatment? I mean, is that what everybody is arguing for? Because they're just a municipality like any others?
I guess the word special gives it away. So it's a special municipality, which basically means that it should be treated the same as any other municipality, but it's not. There's always a reason found why it shouldn't be treated exactly the same as, let's say, Utrecht, where I'm from. Sorry for the international listeners. But as we found, human rights, like the European Convention on Human Rights, they apply exactly the same to Bonaire and Bonairean people as they do in European Netherlands. In theory, all laws should apply the same on Bonaire as they do in European Netherlands, but there's always this way found based on the constitution why Bonaire is so different from European Netherlands that these laws don't need application. So we're basing ourselves on anti-discrimination laws in addition to European human rights to build our case that people on Bonaire should be protected against the climate crisis, just like all other people in the Netherlands should be. And this is also the case for the other special municipalities, because Bonaire is not the only special municipality. We also have Ceiba and Statia, which are higher situated in the Caribbean. So the climate crisis hits these islands differently than Bonaire. And in addition to these 3 special municipalities, you also have 3 countries within the Caribbean that are part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, which is Aruba, Curacao, and St. Martin. And they're also affected by the climate crisis very hard. And we're part of the same Kingdom of the Netherlands. We have a shared history and we have a shared future. So we also argue that responsibility should be taken together. But in the court case, we focus on Bonaire specifically.
And talking about the court case, Kjelld, you explained you are involved in this. You go there periodically. You have another plaintiff who is a farmer. Who else is in the group of plaintiffs? Can you explain a bit the range of people that filed this claim?
Yeah, I can share a little. I don't know if I know exactly what everybody's up to. I can give a general overview of it. We have Jutmar. We were around the same age. He's an artist on the island. He also made the mural that is being used a lot in our campaigning. So he's still settled on Bonaire. I know we have Jackie also, who is a longtime artist on the island, who also makes a lot of wonderful poetry. She's been very involved just culturally on our island in a lot of things to do with cultural expression and stuff. We have Ani, who's a farmer. We have Nick, who's also in our age category and is also working on our own land and farm right now as a young person, which is really cool. We have Daniela, who's also in the Netherlands. There's 2 of us that's in the Netherlands. I know she's doing research. She's doing a lot of nature research with birds.
These sound like great people. And I'm wishing that we could have a whole podcast just focusing on what it's like being an artist working in this field. But I'm wondering, what would you say, Kjelld, binds all these people together? What is it that made them as a group say, this is what we care about?
I think with all our diverse backgrounds, I think each of us just have this appreciation and love for Bonaire from people, some who have been there their entire lives, to even some of us who have either moved away to the Netherlands and come back, or that moved to the Netherlands and haven't gone back yet, like myself. I think the thing that really binds us all is appreciation for the island, but also we've seen the change over the years. Even for someone as young as I am, I'm 28 years old, I've seen the deterioration of the island. I've seen pieces of the coast getting lost. I've seen beaches that have been completely destroyed. So I think it's something that's very straightforward that binds us together, which is just a love for our island and not wanting to lose, this beautiful environment that we have.
Eefje, you want to add to that?
As Kjelld said, the group of plaintiffs, 8 individuals, they are all concerned about their own island and the future of themselves and our future generations on the island. And I think it's interesting that Kjelld also just said that he has seen the island change. And that's also something that I've noticed a lot, because 4 years ago, when we started looking into how climate change affects different people within the Netherlands, we soon realized that there was no specific study done for the Caribbean, for Bonaire. So while the Netherlands, a large part of the Netherlands lies under sea level, we're constantly fighting the water. Reports are done constantly. Adaptation measures are taken constantly. Lots of money goes into it. We saw that the IPCC had already signaled that the Caribbean is very vulnerable to climate change. And at the same time, the Dutch government had done nothing in terms of research or measures for the Caribbean, while Bonaire is a special municipality. So it's part of the Netherlands. When we noticed this, when we observed this around 4 or 5 years ago, we started talking to people on the island, and terms like climate change were not really used as such, which is also not very surprising because the research had not been done. People did already talk about extreme heat, like Kjelld already mentioned, or about the slave huts that are positioned very, very, very close to the water at the south side of the island. So people were already saying that they were worried, but the language to talk about climate change didn't exist. And we started having conversations with people on the island whether they wanted to explore climate change together with Greenpeace the Netherlands. And this is how, in the end, we found this group of individuals that are sort of bound by the fact that they live on an island that is very vulnerable to climate change, and the fact that they want the Dutch government to take protective measures.
You touched upon it a bit with the slave huts, and I also noticed one line running through the plaintiffs that there's a lot of artists and creative people. Would you say, Kjelld, that this climate change also has an impact on cultural heritage? And can you describe how it impacts that in your experience?
I guess the two first things I think of that are not directly like materially culture, but it's more like lifestyles, is that historically people have relied a lot on fishing, a lot of fishermen that make their daily bread that way. Also farming. My grandpa himself used to be a farmer. Used to, is the important word here. Because of the heat and just plants not growing anymore, a lot of farmers had to transition their lifestyle and work into something else. I know my grandpa now, he still has goats, for example, but the growing of corn and things that he did when I was young, it's just not possible anymore. So I think that's culturally also, it's just a big shift that people have to do and find other ways of working and things like that. Same goes with fishermen. The population, the amount of fish that they can catch is becoming worse and worse, meaning that they cannot live their daily lives anymore and get around to paying the things they need to pay. That makes life more difficult. And yes, just like Eefje just mentioned, we have the slave huts, which are these tangible parts of our heritage. They tie back to the colonial days, and they're really close to the coast on the south side of the island. And that's one of the areas that's going to be affected the quickest because it's also very flat. It's the flattest part of the island. I would also say when it comes to just general, say, weekend entertainment and things like that, one of the areas that gets affected the most anytime we have a storm is the one boulevard that we have on the island where pretty much all the restaurants and cafes and things like that are. And any storm that happens, it's the first place that you see that's totally destroyed, totally wrecked, and we have to rebuild it every time again and every time again. I would say those are some of the things I can think of directly when it comes to what we're losing culturally.
Eefje, I don't know if we've actually sufficiently understood exactly what you're asking for in terms of concrete measures. Maybe you can run through them. I mean, is it sticking by essentially what people generally know as the Paris Agreement, the 1.5? Is it some kind of dates and things? What is it that you're asking for very specifically?
If you would allow me to also elaborate on Kjelld for a bit, and then I can come to the demands, because I think it's important to know what the dangers are for Bonaire and why we're demanding what we are together with the plaintiffs. Because Kjelld is telling you more about the effects that people are already feeling on the island right now. But as we found out a few years ago, climate change poses an existential threat to Bonaire and the people living on the island. So we, as the Dutch government wasn't taking their responsibility, we commissioned the Free University of Amsterdam to do its very first research into the effects of climate change on Bonaire and the different scenarios that exist for Bonaire. And the results were very shocking. So they confirmed extreme weather and heat and threats to cultural heritage, like Kjelld just described. But they also noted that sea level is rising around Bonaire at the moment as we speak. And there's a serious chance of a fifth of Bonaire being underwater by the end of this century, which Kjelld and I might still live to see. The coral reefs, which are very important for Bonaire, they provide natural protection against waves coming into Bonaire. They are particularly vulnerable if temperatures rise. Even if we don't manage to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees, like we agreed in the Paris Agreement, most of the coral will probably disappear. And that's really problematic from a protection point of view, but also from a cultural identity point of view and an economy point of view. Like Kjelld just said, fishery is very important for Bonaire. The capital is called Kralendijk, which is basically a translation could be a dike of corals. Bonaire is built basically on fossil corals. Corals in terms of identity and fishery are very important. Also in terms of the economy, it's very important because the economy mostly is based on tourism. and most of the tourists come for the coral to go diving. If the coral disappears, which will happen if we don't manage to combat climate change, or the people from Bonaire cannot live the way that they are doing now. And also in terms of infrastructure, if there is flooding and extreme weather like storms, like Kjelld also just mentioned, like main roads going to, for example, the hospital or to the airport will flood, but also these main services will be affected by water. So access to public goods and services are also jeopardized. So what I'm trying to explain is that it's not a matter of putting some trees down or doing some small measure taking. For Bonaire, it's really crucial that the climate crisis is stopped, that we manage to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees, that the Dutch government taking very big historic responsibility in the climate crisis. Bonaire and the people from Bonaire are not responsible at all, that the Dutch government takes its responsibility in stopping this, but also taking all of the necessary steps to protect the island. So take all of the adaptation measures, as we call it, that is necessary for Bonaire. And at the moment, since research has not been done a lot, it's not very clear what can and should be done to protect Bonaire. So what we're demanding, in addition to stopping the climate crisis and staying under 1.5 degrees global warming, is that a adequate and timely climate plan is being developed together with the people from Bonaire. And this is really important, that the Dutch government doesn't just come in and says, well, we'll build a dike here, or this is what we'll do, because that might work for the Netherlands, where we've had these conversations for a very long time, but it might not be the same for Bonaire. And it's crucial that now we do actually take the people from Bonaire seriously in protecting their own island, because that is what it is.
And we are also a bunch of legal wonks on this podcast. So we'd like to know, Eefje, we've talked about the Urgenda decision. What other kind of rulings are you mentioning in this case were important to you? And can you explain how these different rulings fit into your case, starting with Urgenda, but also looking for international rulings if there are ones that you use?
Yeah, so Urgenda, sorry, we agreed on saying Urgenda. Urgenda's impact cannot be underestimated, because it was the first time that a legal duty to prevent dangerous climate change and to protect the human rights in the face of climate change was established, also on the basis of best available science. This case builds further on that. Also, since you are legal dorks, I might say I'm a legal dork myself, so I think I can call other people that as well. We're building on the two most important rights that were used in the Urgenda case, which is right to life and the right to family life. So those are the two rights that the Bonaire case is built on, and it has added two additional rights or obligations by the state. One is the right to culture, because Bonaire's culture and the culture of the people from Bonaire is actually under threat. Also, the possibility to pass it on to future generations, which is so important for the right to culture to be protected. And lastly, the prohibition of discrimination, because the people from Bonaire are treated differently than the people on mainland Netherlands, European Netherlands. So it's really a next step in the Urgenda jurisprudence. I think one of the most important or inspiring cases that we looked at for this case is the Torres Strait Island case that was won at the Human Rights Committee, the United Nations Human Rights Committee in 2022, where the committee found that Australia was violating the rights of the indigenous people living on the Torres Strait Islands, and said that Australia needed to both mitigate and provide adaptation, so contribute to stopping climate change or the effects of climate change, and also protecting the people on the Torres Strait Islands against the effects of climate change, and actually also providing them with compensation, which is basically, it's a very similar case to the Bonaire case, also because of the colonial history and also the way that the people on the island live together with the land and on the land and together with each other, and also the need for adaptation measures. And I think the big difference between that case and the Bonaire case is, legally they're very similar, because even though here we have the European Convention on Human Rights that we can luckily invoke, the Torres Strait Island case looked at UN law, but very similarly, right to life and right to family life and culture. But we're here, luckily, in the Netherlands, we can go to a domestic court where we also have enforcement mechanisms. So if we win this case, we can actually make sure that the government follows the order by the courts.
I wanted to ask you, Kjelld, because we're talking about what the Netherlands all does for climate change, and every time there's a lot of rain or there's flooding in Limburg, there's a lot of talk about how we're going to resolve it, and we hardly see anything about climate change in the Caribbean part of the Netherlands. You live here now permanently. How does that feel for you to see all that attention going to this side? Let's see, European Netherlands, and not a lot to the Caribbean.
Yeah. First of all, it's the reaction that they have to what happened in Limburg is a very good reaction. And I feel like that's the same type of response that we deserve. But this type of negligence of the islands, it's a pattern. I'm also involved in other, teams that connect back to the colonial history of the Netherlands. Yeah, different things are happening in the country because of that. And you see time and time again that the islands are being forgotten. So even if you look at the recent apologies that were done by the minister and the king, the minister still mentioned the island, the king barely. And even that with the minister is because of communities and grassroots organizations that went and fought for all the regions to be represented in such things. If you look at when it comes to the social benefits, if you look at minimum wage and things like that, you see that there also the European part of the Netherlands have been ignoring cries of extreme poverty on the islands for decades. While when we became a municipality, poverty was supposed to become less. It actually doubled since we've become part of the Netherlands. And this is something that people on the islands have been addressing for a while. But again, The Hague doesn't seem to either get it on the radar or they don't seem to care. It's one of the two. I think this is just a pattern, and partially it can be explained by the distance and that it's kind of out of the periphery of people. It's few people in The Hague. But I think partially also, I feel this is still a bit of a repetition of colonial patterns that we've been experiencing already.
Just for our listeners who are not super au fait with Dutch politics, the apologies Kjelld was talking about was that the Dutch king and some of the ministers went around former colonies of the Netherlands last year to apologize for slavery formally.
I wanted to pick up with you, Eefje, because I feel I'm actually honestly swamped at the moment by the numbers of decisions that are coming out. We've just had the European Court of Human Rights decision on what you mentioned reminded me of that. It was about the right to family life, as far as I remember, and these inspiring climats in Europe. Well, I was really inspired by them because here I am, a grey woman, and there they are, grey women at the court. And then I'm looking also ahead to another decision that's coming later this month at ITLOS, the Tribunal of Law of the Sea. So there seems to be an awful lot of international courts saying, states, do your stuff. And we're expecting this similar from ITLOS. How far does that play into, will you be bringing it up in your cases that Dutch look at this, Dutch look at that? Is that what you do?
Certainly. I think what you see is that these international courts and tribunals are confirming what we've been seeing, is that the climate crisis is the biggest human rights threat of our time. And what is the law, definitely public international law, if it wouldn't be able to deal with these massive international existential threats? So we're very happy with these interpretations that we're getting from the advisory opinions, but also from the courts. And I think what you see in the Klimatseniorinnen case is that the court, 17 judges of them, the highest judges in Europe, have sent a very clear signal to all European nations that climate change poses a direct threat to human rights. and that all nations need to act in line with 1.5 degrees, which means keeping the world under 1.5 degrees global warming. And it brings a positive obligation to states to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. So it's a very clear ruling that is applicable to all countries within the realm of the ECHR, which is wider even than the European Union. So I think what the court is saying, all nations, you have to step up your game, because at this moment, you're really not on the right track. We're on track to reach, I think, 3 degrees global warming, and we're already on 1.5 degrees. And it should be said that that can be a temporary overshoot. So we can go back to the 1.5, but not if we continue the way that we are doing now. And what we have also seen is that the European Court is opening the door for a fair share contribution. And that's really important to us because the Netherlands has an historic responsibility. Globally, if you look at the historic contribution to climate change, we're probably one of the nations most responsible. And we should also, because we have the means and the possibility to actually go a lot faster at reducing greenhouse gas emissions within the Netherlands, we should. And the court also opens this possibility of forcing certain countries to go faster than others because that would be their fair share. And that is the next step that we are also taking in the Bonaire case, because we want the Dutch court to go much faster than it is now.
Talking about faster, what is the timeline for this case? What do you expect in the next few months, and what are the steps moving forward? And maybe also expectations of these cases can be very high, but what actually concretely could affected people expect?
I think Kjelld can also elaborate on this, but in terms of the legal procedure, we're still talking to the court and also the state on the timeline. We do see the court wanting to take fast steps, quick steps. I think it's clear to everyone how urgent a case this is. We do see that these cases are being handled quicker than normally cases would. That's at the European Court level, but it's also at the Dutch level. So we hope that we will have hearings soon in which the plaintiffs can speak for themselves and talk about the effects that they are already experiencing. And then that we'll have a ruling soon, obviously. The stakes are high and the expectations are high. And we believe that we've built a very strong case together with a lot of scientists, a lot of lawyers. We think it's a very clear case of unequal treatment and the need for taking a more serious step. We feel like science is also backing us up. All of the legal developments are backing us up. But this is not where we stop. We're not going to sit and wait for the ruling and for the Dutch government to take the steps that it needs to take. We're Greenpeace, right? We're campaigning. And together with these brave people from Bonaire, living on Bonaire, but also in European Netherlands, we're going to keep pressuring the Dutch government to take these steps now, because this climate plan needs to be developed now, for example, but also CO2 emissions need to be reduced a lot faster. And we feel like we cannot be waiting for the courts to be filling in the blanks that the Dutch government isn't, because basically it's very clear, and it has been for years, what the Dutch government need to do. So now they're basically just waiting for the court to do their jobs because the governments aren't. And we're not waiting for that. We're going to be holding them to account together with Kjelld and the other plaintiffs.
Kjelld, what are your expectations?
So for me, the expectations are pretty straightforward. I think we need to start with basic research. So what are the elevation levels from Bonaire? What are the exact depth levels around the island when it comes to water? We don't have basic information like that, which is necessary for people to come with ideas and projects and research. I'm thinking in those very practical things of like what the next steps are. And the situation is that the knowledge, the expertise, the funds, it's all in the European part of the Netherlands, not on the Caribbean part of the Netherlands. So I think also that's why we're demanding what we're demanding in this forum, so that the Dutch state can use its resources, can use all the expertise it has to come up with at least the data that we need. And then from there, we can work together with the institutions in the Netherlands and the people over there that have also nature-based solutions and things like that we need to look at. Then we can bring all of that together with data that has been made, and we can come to plans that works specifically for Bonaire.
Thank you so much for explaining this. We always end this podcast with a question of what didn't we ask you, or what did you want to add that we forgot to ask about? And this is your chance to add whatever you want that we didn't say. So I think, Kjelld, you have something extra you want to say, and then we'll move to Eefje.
Yeah, so next to the demands that we're asking when it comes to data and research for what's necessary for Bonaire, we are noticing that this case also, it's causing a bit of a ripple effect in the region, specifically for the islands that are also in the Dutch kingdom, because their situation is just so similar that if this sets a precedent, they can also use that in their own cases. We've had very interesting conversations recently when we went to St. Martin for a climate camp. But there are even cases like Puerto Rico who have a dependency relationship with the US. They were very interested in looking into this case to see it like, hey, can we apply this in our own context as well? Some of the other islands that still, like the USVI and the BVI, maybe I should pronounce this, the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands, that also have dependency relationships with a colonial power. Our case was received very well, and people try to break it down. Like, okay, what of this can we use in our own case? Can we use as inspiration? So I think that's a very powerful signal where marginalized communities or post-colonial communities can unify and band together for collective action.
Eefje, I know you're dying to add more context and more stuff, because that's the Greenpeace way. So this is your podium. Go ahead.
Actually, funny enough, I think Kjelld just said it all at the end. That's what I was hoping for. It's a climate case, but it's also a social justice case. It really shows how past inequalities still live on today, and we have to tackle the climate crisis and inequality together at the same time. And that's really what we try to do with this case together with people from Bonaire.
We end the podcast always with our final question. Is there anything you would like to recommend to our audience in terms of listening, watching, reading? Is whatever's on your nightstand or whatever's in your Netflix, etc., queue, or something relevant to this that you think might be illuminating, or something completely different? So start with you, Eefje, while I can see that Kjelld is thinking, what shall I come up with? What would you like to recommend, Eefje?
Well, I would like to recommend people to become a supporter of the case, because even though the plaintiffs are all people who are from Bonaire, we need the support from everyone. It's not an easy campaign. It's not an easy court case, particularly the plaintiffs. They're regular people. They live their normal jobs. Poverty is a major issue on the island. Some of the plaintiffs also have several jobs to maintain their families, their own livelihoods. They could really do with your signature, basically. The more people we have behind us, the stronger the signal is to the Dutch government that they shouldn't wait until they're beaten again by the courts. It's a strong signal to the courts that we have the support from so many people within the Netherlands, but also within the world. So my invitation is for people to become a supporter, and you can do that on the website. And that's what I was just looking up, what the website exactly is, because it's quite a simple link.
Oh, I actually know that one out of my head. Repeat it, act.gp/Bonaire.
And Kjelld, what would you like to suggest in terms of reading or listening or watching that you think might inspire our audience?
Thinking about this, I thought about an action, more about something to read. If people are to travel to the Caribbean or small island nations, make sure that you stay local. Don't incentivize these big businesses, often foreign businesses or external businesses that are coming and are destroying our lands, destroying our reefs, destroying the mangroves that are protecting our islands. Please, if you're traveling to the Caribbean or other small island nations, make sure you stay with local restaurants, local hotels, and local initiatives that are really contributing to the island and not making economic extraction on the islands worse.
So 2 great activist tips at the end. So we'll make a link to the actual case and your campaign around it. And thank you both very much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for taking the time.
Very welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us and asking these great questions.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast. created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg. Music is by audionautics.com, and you can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.